Hello, and welcome back to our series, Back to the Basics. This is lesson two, part two, and we are discussing the belief in God. On our previous lesson, we talked about two arguments to prove that God exists. One argument was the argument from desire, and the other argument was life without meaning if God does not exist. Today, I want us to look at two more arguments. I want us to look at the argument from morality and then the argument from cosmology. So let's first talk about the argument from morality. What do we mean by morality? Well, what I mean is there are some things that are good and some things that are evil. There are some things that are right and there are some things that are wrong. When we think about right and wrong, good and evil, is this a social construct? Is it relative to each individual? Is it a result of evolution or is it from God? Here's the premise of the moral argument. Premise number one: if God does not exist, then objective morals and values do not exist. Premise number two: objective morals and values do exist. Therefore, the conclusion is God exists. So let's define a couple terms here. What do we mean by objective morality? Objective morality means morals that are independent of human opinion, which means there are some things that are absolutely right and absolutely wrong, no matter what we feel or think about them. Well, what about subjective morality? Subjective morality are morals that are dependent on human opinion or preference. In other words, it's things that we personally feel that are right or wrong, but it may vary from person to person, where each person may not align with the same conclusions and views that we have about what's right and what's wrong. It's kind of like preferring chocolate over vanilla flavored ice cream. However, if there is no objective giver of moral absolutes, then rape, slavery, and genocide are simply rude behaviors. And we know that to not be true. If absolute morality exists, then God must exist, for there must be some standard to judge what is right and what is wrong. We know that every civilization has had some standard of rules and laws that are right and that are wrong. For example, stabbing a pregnant woman in the stomach is wrong. Torturing a child for fun is absolutely wrong. However, without God, morals and values are subjective cultural constructs that change and shift depending on societal norms and individual interests. And that is extremely dangerous. What I think is morally right, you may believe is morally wrong. Well, then who's right if God does not exist and there is no objective standard to right and wrong? For evil to truly exist, for something to truly be wrong, there must be some standard and foundation of absolute good and evil to be measured. Without God, there is no objective standard for moral behavior. Atheist Richard Dawkins says this: there is no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pointless indifference. His statement would be true if God does not exist. I'm not saying that atheists are not moral or cannot live a life of value and significance. Many of them do, even more so than Christians. But what I am saying is that if humanity is an accident of evolution, morals and values are also accidents of evolution as well. If atheism is true, then there is no objective basis for morality. If the material universe is all there is, then morals, values, right and wrong are byproducts of non living matter. And that just sounds ridiculous to me. Here's some questions I would want to consider. If morality is evolutionary, why aren't animals becoming more moral today? Why is morality exclusive only to the human race? How does something that is non moral suddenly become moral? How does something non living and therefore non moral suddenly become living and moral? To help us better understand the moral argument, let's briefly look at a video by Reasonable Faith written by Dr. William Lane Craig.
Can you be good without God? Let's find out. absolutely astounding. There you have it. Undeniable proof that you can be good without believing in God. But wait, the question isn't, can you be good without believing in God? The question is, can you be good without God? See, here's the problem. If there is no God, what basis remains for objective good or bad, right or wrong? If God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. And here's why. Without some objective reference point, we have no way of saying that something is really up or down. God's nature provides an objective reference point for moral values. It's the standard against which all actions and decisions are measured. But if there's no God, there's no objective reference point. All we're left with is one person's viewpoint, which is no more valid than anyone else's viewpoint. This kind of morality is subjective, not objective. It's like a preference for strawberry ice cream. The preference is in the subject, not the object. So it doesn't apply to other people. In the same way, subjective morality applies only to the subject. It's not valid or binding for anyone else. So, in a world without God, there can be no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. God has expressed His moral nature to us as commands. These provide the basis for moral duties. For example, God's essential attribute of love is expressed in His command to love your neighbor as yourself. This command provides a foundation upon which we can affirm the objective goodness of generosity, self-sacrifice, and equality. And we can condemn as objectively evil greed, abuse, and discrimination. This raises a problem. Is something good just because God wills it, or does God will something because it is good? The answer is neither one. Rather, God wills something because He is good. God is the standard of moral values, just as a live musical performance is the standard for a high-fidelity recording.
Without your love.
The more a recording sounds like the original, the better it is. Likewise, the more closely a moral action conforms to God's nature, the better it is. But if atheism is true, there is no ultimate standard. So there can be no moral obligations or duties. Who or what lays such duties upon us? No one. Remember, for the atheist, humans are just accidents of nature, highly evolved animals. But animals have no moral obligations to one another. When a cat kills a mouse, it hasn't done anything morally wrong. The cat's just being a cat. If God doesn't exist, we should view human behavior in the same way. No action should be considered morally right or wrong. But the problem is, good and bad, right and wrong, do exist. Just as our sense experience convinces us that the physical world is objectively real, our moral experience convinces us that moral values are objectively real. Every time you say, "Hey, that's not fair, that's wrong, that's an injustice," you affirm your belief in the existence of objective morals. We're well aware that child abuse, racial discrimination, and terrorism are wrong for everybody, always. Is this just a personal preference or opinion? No. The man who says that it is morally acceptable to rape little children is just as mistaken as the man who says 2 + 2 = 5. What all this amounts to, then, is a moral argument for the existence of God. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. But objective moral values and duties do exist. Therefore, God exists. Atheism fails to provide a foundation for the moral reality every one of us experiences every day. In fact, the existence of objective morality points us directly to the existence of God.
Now that we've looked at the argument for morality, let us now turn to the argument from cosmology. So, what is the premise? Premise number one: whatever begins to exist has a cause. Premise number two: the universe began to exist. Premise number three: therefore, the universe has a cause. And the conclusion is God exists, for God is the cause of the universe. Currently, there are three views of the universe. View number one is that the universe created itself. View number two, the universe is eternal and infinite and has always existed, or the universe was created. To say that the universe created itself is to say that the universe must have already been in existence for it to create itself, and that is simply illogical. But what about the second view? The universe is eternal. Well, we know, and science has attested to the idea that the universe is not eternal, it is not infinite, and it actually has a beginning point. To say that the universe is eternal is to believe that the actual number of past events is infinite. It must be known that an actual, tangible infinity does not exist in the real world, in our universe. Infinity is just an abstract idea, not a physical reality. For example, what's the number right before you get to infinity? Let's say you've been counting for thousands and thousands of years and you finally reach infinity. What's that number right before infinity? In fact, what's infinity minus one? These questions cannot be answered. Therefore, past events are real and not abstract. Therefore, an actual number of past events cannot exist, which implies the universe had a beginning point. If you cannot count to infinity, you can't count down from infinity. If you were to attempt to count down from infinity, you would have to count all the negative numbers as well. This is proof that an actual infinite does not exist. Let me give you a few examples to help this make a little bit more sense. The series of past events is formed by adding one event after another. If the universe is infinite, then there is an infinite number of past events that have happened before we reach today, which would imply that we can count past number of infinite days. Yesterday was 1 day ago. The day before yesterday was 2 days ago. The day before that was 3 days ago, and so on until you reach infinity. Today would never arrive because an infinite number of days would have to have already occurred first. Here's another example. Imagine you see an infinite number of dominoes falling one by one until the last domino falls. But if an actual infinite exists, the last domino would never fall because an infinite number of dominoes would have had to have fallen first. We know the effect of one domino falling is caused by the previous domino falling on it, which is caused by the previous domino falling on it, and so on and so on. Eventually, you have to reach a beginning point where the first domino is made to fall. This naturally results in the question, who pushed the first domino? To say the universe has always existed is to believe that dominoes have been falling forever without any first cause. Here's another example of a beginning to our universe. Scientists, researchers, astrologists have discovered something called the redshift. Redshift is evidence that distant galaxies are receding, expanding from the Milky Way, our current universe. If these distant galaxies are expanding, then if we were to rewind time, the galaxies would retract to become closer together, which implies a single starting point of expansion. Therefore, the universe had a starting point. It has not always existed. So we know the universe had a beginning, and that beginning must have been God. Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The word created in the Hebrew is bara, which refers to forming or creating something from pre-existing material, turning a stick into a wooden ruler or a piece of steel into a knife. This is also the way that God made Adam, the first man. He formed him from the dust of the earth. But then in John chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, it says this, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. That word made in the Greek translates to created. And that Greek word is gename, which means to bring into being, to become or to emerge, to pop into existence from nothing. We know that nothing comes from nothing. We know this by simple observation and experience in our universe. The universe is the effect, therefore, it must have a cause, and that cause is God. Since all space and time and matter were created at the beginning of the universe, the cause of the universe must be timeless, non material, non physical, uncaused, uncreated, and changeless. Only one being fits these characteristics, and that being is God. We know that nothing exists without a cause. Everything that exists must have a cause for its existence. To say that the universe just popped into being uncaused out of nothing is absurd. So if the universe burst into existence without a cause, why doesn't anything and everything burst into existence uncaused? Like pianos or Mozart or tigers or fire trucks or planets or galaxies or entire solar systems. Why aren't they bursting into our galaxy and solar system right now or sometime in the past? Some may say, well, if the universe was created by God, then who created God? Here's the response. God did not begin to exist, therefore he has no cause. Those who propose such a question imply that an infinite number of past causes exist, which is impossible, because then you would have a regression of infinite causes, and you'll never arrive at a first cause. Furthermore, if God has a cause, what kind of cause would it be? What's more powerful than God? If something caused God, then what caused the thing that caused God? And then you have an infinite regress of causes. To help us better understand this argument from cosmology, let us look at another video by Reasonable Faith, written by Dr. William Lane Craig.
Does God exist? Or is the material universe all that is, or ever was, or ever will be? One approach to answering this question is the cosmological argument. It goes like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore, the universe has a cause. Is the first premise true? Let's consider. Believing that something can pop into existence without a cause is more of a stretch than believing in magic. At least with magic, you've got a hat and a magician. And if something can come into being from nothing, then why don't we see this happening all the time? No, everyday experience and scientific evidence confirm our first premise. If something begins to exist, it must have a cause. But what about our second premise? Did the universe begin, or has it always existed? Atheists have typically said that the universe has been here forever. The universe is just there, and that's all. First, let's consider the second law of thermodynamics. It tells us the universe is slowly running out of usable energy, and that's the point. If the universe had been here forever, it would have run out of usable energy by now. The second law points us to a universe that has a definite beginning. This is further confirmed by a series of remarkable scientific discoveries. In 1915, Albert Einstein presented his general theory of relativity. This allowed us, for the first time, to talk meaningfully about the past history of the universe. Next, Alexander Friedmann and George Lemaitre, each working with Einstein's equations, predicted that the universe is expanding. Then in 1929, Edwin Hubble measured the red shift in light from distant galaxies. This empirical evidence confirmed not only that the universe is expanding, but that it sprang into being from a single point in the finite past. It was a monumental discovery, almost beyond comprehension. However, not everyone is fond of a finite universe, so it wasn't long before alternative models popped into existence. But one by one, these models failed to stand the test of time. More recently, 3 leading cosmologists, Arvin Bord, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin, proved that any universe which has on average been expanding throughout its history cannot be eternal in the past, but must have an absolute beginning. This even applies to the multiverse, if there is such a thing. This means that scientists can no longer hide behind a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Any adequate model must have a beginning, just like the standard model. It's quite plausible then that both premises of the argument are true. This means that the conclusion is also true. The universe has a cause. And since the universe can't cause itself, its cause must be beyond the space-time universe. It must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, uncaused, and unimaginably powerful, much like God. The cosmological argument shows that, in fact, it is quite reasonable to believe that God does exist.
Today, we've discussed the moral argument and the cosmological argument for additional proof of God's existence. Some of these arguments you may like, some you may not like. And not one argument should be taken to show or to prove that God exists. However, I think collectively, if we bring all these arguments to the table, it is more reasonable and more probable that God exists. Thank you for your time and thank you for your attention. I hope something that was said in this video was encouraging, was enlightening, was uplifting, and informative. I look forward to meeting with you next time for lesson 3.